Alright, continuing on with Chapter 6, Sticky Note Lecture, number 3. Alright, so here on this page we have ponds. Now ponds go through succession as well, but it's a little bit different than other ecosystems. These are small ponds. These are not lakes or oceans. These are just ponds. And what happens in ponds is that you have aquatic plants that grow on the top of the ponds or near the sides of the pond. And when they die, they decompose, and over time they form sediments down here. Sometimes you have some erosion from land that goes into the pond as well. And so you build up sediments, you build up decomposed aquatic plants, and even animal waste, their poop, their animal waste, can build up at the bottom over time. Over time, so many sediments are deposited that basically a pond turns into land and then grows trees. And so that's different than the other kinds of succession, so make sure you know pond succession as well. The word regeneration is referring to when an ecosystem returns to a healthy state. And the term climax community is at the very end of succession. The climax community will be different in a forest versus a desert. In a forest, you get your big tall trees back at the end of succession. So fire comes through, it goes through secondary succession, you end with the big trees back. It might take 100 years, but you're going to end in the big trees. But a desert doesn't have big trees. So at the end of succession for a desert, you might have just big giant shrubs, or maybe a few Joshua trees, or saguaro cacti in the Sonoran Desert by Phoenix. It just depends on the ecosystem. And so your climax community will look very different in different ecosystems. But it's the most mature ecosystem, it's the climax community. Some ecosystems never return to their former state. If you chop down tropical rainforests, they will never come back. And that has to do with the fact that in a tropical rainforest, it has a ton of nutrients, but they're not in the soil. When things die and decompose in a tropical rainforest, they decompose so quickly that the nutrients are reabsorbed back into plants so fast that none of them sit in the soil. And so if you chop down a rainforest, and even though there might be seeds in the ground for all the different plant species that used to be there, it will never grow back because there's not enough nutrients in the soil to supply enough for the regeneration of that ecosystem. Alright, on page 167 we're talking more about invasive species and more about zebra mussels. Here we have the clogged intake pipes for a power plant, actually, in this example. We have phytoplankton that's being eaten up. The native mussels and clams are losing because of competition. And we have humans that have an economic loss. And you can see that it has spread starting in the Great Lakes, and it's been found even as far away as here in California. So invasive species are also called introduced species. They're also called alien species. So you might hear these terms occasionally for the same thing. They have no natural predators in this new environment. So these are species that come from somewhere else to a different continent or a different country, and there's no natural predators, and they outcompete the native species for resources. The number of invasive species has sped up recently because of global trade. Through globalization and the trade of products across the globe, more critters can attach themselves to shipping boats and cargo and boxes and find their way into different parts of the world. The next page, page 168, we discuss degradation. Degradation of an ecosystem is the deterioration of an environment through the depletion of the resources such as air, water, soil. It can also refer to the extinction of wildlife. So you will very often in this course hear the word degradation. Make sure you know what degradation means. So we will talk about soil degradation, air degradation, habitat degradation for wildlife, etc. You also need to know what the word ecological restoration means. Returning ecosystems to their historical conditions. For example, the prairie in the Midwest of the United States, 99 point whatever, has been turned into farms. And so there are scientists that are trying to restore some of that prairie land, and it's tall grass prairie. Very, very tall, taller than you or I. Another example is, it says FL period, that stands for Florida Everglades. They're doing some restoration in the Florida Everglades. I think your book discusses that. And then Mesopotamia that you learned about in history, I think junior high history, something like that. In Iraq, they're trying to restore this area in Iraq. So there's lots of ecologists, and you could even get a job in this someday if it interests you to restore ecosystems. The next part of Chapter 6, which is Earth's biomes, will be on your next exam. So this will be on your Ecology 2 exam. So I'm not going to discuss the biomes at this point in time. That will be later